Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you for joining me. I'm so glad you're here. In my last video, I shared how to use dies to create the look of peel-offs and glitter. In this video, I'm going to reuse some of the paper that I created with that one with alcohol ink, as well as show you how to create your own specialty metallic papers. So to do this, I'm going to use some wax paste, and I have Inca Gold. It's a water-based or water-soluble wax paste that I'm going to use to create this pink metallic background, and then I'm also going to use it to create a platinum metallic background. Now, the great thing with these wax pastes is they come in so many different colors. There's a bunch of different companies that are doing them now. I bought mine many years ago, so I've had them for a very long time. So they're actually a little bit harder in texture than they were when I first bought them. So you'll see me spraying water on top of them to rehydrate them a little bit. They also dry super fast, so it's a great way to make a quick and easy metallic paper if you don't happen to have one in the color that you're wanting. Now, metallic papers come in so many different colors, but sometimes for just one project, you may not want to go out and buy some just for that. So it's a great way to reuse these wax pastes and give them another life. So this paper here that I just finished doing, it's already dry. So that finger that I'm using is not the one that I used to spread the paste around. And the great thing with this one being water soluble is just a little baby wipe, and I can clean my finger right off and have a fresh palette for my next color. You don't need to use any special tools. As you see, I'm just spreading it around on my finger. Adding another tool just means something else to clean. So by being able to use your fingers, it makes it super easy. And like I said, there's so many different companies that make them nowadays that it doesn't necessarily have to be Inca Gold that you use. This is just the one that I happen to have, and I really like it. The amount that you get in a container goes a really long way, and it lasts a long time. So this one here, this is why I did this one second, because you don't really see much of it going on. You see that it gets a little bit of a metallic sheen, but the color isn't much different than the paste. Now, the paper that I'm putting it on is just some inexpensive white cardstock that I have. It's nothing special. It's thinner than I probably would like, but I just like being able to use up some inexpensive cardstock, so that's why I'm using it. Now, this metallic paper that we're making is actually going to do double duty. We're going to use it to do mats on our card, as well as to die cut different pieces to inlay into our card to create the kimono. Now, as I said, I'm using inexpensive cardstock, and the wax paste goes a really long way, so it's fairly inexpensive in itself. But this is a trick that I like to use when I'm using my more expensive specialty papers. I like to use them to do the mats on the cards, as well as to die cut out of them, just to give them double duty. And most of the time, when you're creating cards and die cutting, your mats, you don't see what's underneath the center part anyways. So to use that to die cut, no one would ever know. So, and you probably didn't even know from the sample when I showed you until I told you. So I'm using my kimono die here. If you watched the last video where I used it, I tore up the packaging pretty badly getting the die off of the packaging. So I've put a little piece of magnet there so that it makes using this die a lot easier. I'm putting all of the pieces together, and I'm just going to use some die tape to hold it together while I'm doing my die cutting. You want to put your die tape on and then just rub it on really well, just to make sure that it's got some good contact with the die and that it's not going to come loose when you are die cutting your pieces. I'm going to die cut my pink piece first. I've got these already cut down to the size of mats that I want for my card front. So it makes it really easy to place them on the card and know that I've got enough room around the edges. Once I have put it through my machine, I'm going to take the die cut pieces out and just put them in a pile on the top of my mat, get them all ready, place them in piles by their colors, and just have them ready there for when I go to assemble my card. Now, some of these flowers from this kimono have some really tiny pieces, and you want to make sure to take them out of all of the die pieces. You don't want to go and die cut something else with those little bits and pieces in there. I have kept some of those itty bitty pieces, but I likely won't use them because they're so tiny. It would be really frustrating to put them to inlay them into a card and to be reusing them, but I have left them in those piles there. So I've got my pink one all cut, and now I am cutting the platinum one. I'm going to do the same thing as I did with the pink one. I'm going to put them in a pile at the top of my workstation here. Now these black pieces are the black alcohol ink pieces from my last video, from the card that I made with that one. Now when I die cut the kimono die for that, I only used the outline bit, so I didn't put the inside bits for the floral areas. And so what I'm doing right now is I am taping those dies to those pieces that I'm going to be using in order to cut those pieces out of there, so then I can inlay some of the other pieces. Now the technique that we're doing when we're doing these inlays are called paper piecing. Basically it's like cutting up the same die in a bunch of different colors and then putting it back together like a puzzle. It's really, really easy. It's a great way to use up scrap pieces of paper if you have them. For what I'm doing here with this black piece here, I'm only using the outline parts. I'm not using the inner floral parts, so I'm going to leave those in my die and take them out off screen before I put my die away. Now, if I wanted to, I could have left these pieces intact as they were and then just glue the flower bits on top. But I have a little trick here that I'm going to be using when I'm putting these kimono pieces together. And it's just going to work a little bit easier if I have those flowers cut out, and it's just going to look a lot nicer at the end. So first thing I'm going to do is glue down my pink mat that I've used to die cut the kimono out of the center. I'm just using some distressed collage medium. I like using distressed collage medium, so if any of that happens to squish out the sides, it dries completely matte and it dries clear, so you're not going to see it. Now my paper has curled from that little bit of moisture I put in the Inca Gold when I was rubbing it on. The paper that I use typically doesn't like any moisture, so that's why it's a little bit curled. So I'm going to put an acrylic block on there to hold it down while it's drying. Now my second piece, the platinum piece here, I'm putting it on some wide sukwang. Now I have a roll here. It's the most economical way to get it. You can buy it in sheets as well. If you're not sure if it's going to be your cup of tea, that's a great way to start out. So I'm cutting a piece to cover the back of this platinum piece. I'm putting it down, making sure it's nice and flat. I don't want to have any crinkles or anything on there. I want to make sure that it's flat. It's going to make it much easier to put all these pieces in there. The first piece I'm going to put in is my outline for my kimono. And if you've got steady hands, you can just place it right in there. However, sometimes when you die cut papers, they warp a little bit as you're putting them down. So the best way to put it down and make sure you've got good placement is to use a piece of wax paper or parchment paper between your die cut and the piece you're putting it down on. This way you can take your time to place it and you don't have to worry about that die cut coming in contact with the tape. This tape is so sticky. If you had some paper going down, to lift it up, you'd end up having to rip the paper and possibly rip your die cut and have to start all over again. So doing it this way makes it much easier. It's a lot easier putting in the inlay pieces. It's kind of like putting a puzzle together. Now I'm not pressing them down fully. I'm just placing them, making sure they've got good placement in each of the sections. Once I have them all down, then I will take a piece of tape backing and I will rub them in and make sure that they've got good contact. If I do it now, there's a good chance I'm going to be touching the adhesive in the back, and I don't want it to lose any of its stickiness. So that's why I'm just placing it in there lightly, making sure that it's placed properly. Now for the kimono pieces, I'm going to put mostly black in there, but I will put a couple pieces that are platinum just to give it a little bit of variety and make it look a little bit more interesting. But because we have it going onto adhesive, it goes together really, really quickly. Now, if you weren't comfortable working right with adhesive, you could take this platinum outline piece and put it on the card front and then use liquid glue with a fine tipped bottle and glue all of these pieces in. The only thing that you risk then is the possibility of having some glue ooze out and show on the front of it. By doing this, I don't have to worry about any glue showing. I just have to fit it into each area properly and know that by fitting it in there, it is totally stuck. This glue or this tape, double-sided tape, is really, really good, and nothing is going to fall apart. Now, some of the flowers, as I was picking them up, I noticed some of the little tiny areas on the inside of the flowers still had some pieces in there. So you see me poking those out. I want to make sure that they are all out. And I'm not going to inlay pieces in those tiny little open areas. I've got another plan for that. You could, if you wanted to, inlay all those tiny little pieces, but some of them are as small as a pinhead. So to get the exact right one to inlay, it would be frustrating. It's possible, but it's just not my cup of tea. So I've got another plan for that. So all of the flowers are in there. If you've got a piece like this one that I'm putting in right now that's really, really tiny, some tweezers will help you get proper placement. I've got the ones where you squeeze them to open in. For this particular application, that's totally fine. On my last card, you needed to have the ones where you squeeze them and hold them shut. But for this one, just because we're inlaying some paper pieces, any tweezers will work. It's just going to be a little bit easier than placing them in with your fingers. Now I'm just putting in the very last piece here. Once I've got the last piece in there, I'm going to take that tape backing and I'm just going to rub everything really well, making sure that it has some good contact with the adhesive behind it. And this is just going to flatten everything. If you have a corner that happens to be lifted up a little bit, not quite down, that's going to put it down. So my little secret for filling in all those holes is to get some microfine glitter and sprinkle it on each of those open areas. Then I'm going to tap the excess off and use a soft brush to remove any that is stuck to the front of the card. This is not only going to fill in those open areas, the little tiny pieces that have some adhesive in them, but it's also going to give the card a little bit of a different texture in those areas and a little bit of sparkle. And it just really, in my opinion, brings it to life. I just think that extra texture on there really adds to the card. Now I'm taking that tape backing that I used to push everything down and I'm just burnishing it. And what that does with the glitter, it just makes sure it has some good contact with the adhesive on the back, and that way you're not going to have glitter pieces falling out. Now that that piece is done, we're going to glue this to the front of the card, but there's a little hack, if you will, for getting it down flat. If I took this entire backing off and tried to lay it properly, there's a good chance I'd have it a little bit crooked, and you're never going to get it back up again to straighten it. So what I've done is I've taken it partly down on an angle with the ends sticking out a little bit. I'm placing the bottom part that has the tape backing first, making sure everything's straight. Once it's straight, I will push down the top to make sure the tape has contact with the card, and then I will slowly pull out the bottom part and glue that down. That way I know I've got some good placement. So the last thing I want to do for my card here is I want to put a little sentiment on there. I just did something very simple. It just says, "Hello, friend." So I've got some black cardstock here. I'm going to stamp it with some embossing ink, and I'm going to emboss it with gold embossing powder, and that's going to coordinate with the gold glitter that we put in all those little tiny open pieces there. So I've placed my stamp in there, put my embossing ink on it, and stamped it. Before I stamped on the paper, I did use my embossing powder tool to make sure that the embossing powder wasn't going to stick in areas that I didn't want it to stick. I do this on a scrap piece of paper, so any excess powder can go right back into the container and I don't have any waste. And then I'm going to take a heat tool and I'm going to melt the powder on the paper. It's really easy to see when it is done because it goes from being granular and dull to glossy and shiny gold. And it usually happens pretty quickly. Once I have it embossed, I'm going to take my mini trimmer. I'm just going to cut it down so that I have just a little bit of an area all the way around it. Now, originally I was going to cut it down and then just glue it on my card like this, but it just seemed like something was a little bit missing. So I took a piece of paper that has the same glitter on it that was left over from a previous project, and I'll show the card briefly in a few moments. And I used that for a mat around it, and it framed that sentiment really well, and it also coordinated with the glitter that I put inside the flowers, and it just finished the whole card off. So I'm taking that Distress Collage medium and I'm going to glue that onto the glitter piece. And I'm going to leave that for just a few minutes to let that glitter kind of set into the, let the glue set into the glitter for a moment. While I'm letting it sit for a moment, this is the card here that it's the excess off of. I have a video from a couple weeks ago creating that card if you wanted to take a look at it. But anytime I have pieces that are a decent size that could be reused again, I like to keep them and reuse them, and this is the perfect way to do it. That's exactly the same glitter that I put in the flower, so it coordinates perfectly with the card. And I'm just leaving just a little tiny mat around my sentiment. I didn't want it to be too big and take focus away from the kimono, but it's just the right amount of sparkle. Then I'm going to use that same Distress Collage medium and glue it to my card and put an acrylic block on it for just a moment while the glue sets. While that is setting, I'm going to clean up some of the excess die cuts I have that I haven't used on this card. Now they're not going to go to waste. What I'm going to do is put them in a little Ziploc bag, and I'm just going to put them all together, and then I will store them with my die cut. So anytime I use this exact die, if I have, I want to add different colors or different pieces or do inlay with it, I'll have a bunch of pre-cut pieces, and I might as well have them right with the die so that I don't have to try to remember where I put them. I'll know exactly where they are. But a great way to, reuse some of the pieces and not have them go to waste. And this is the final card here. Really pretty with those specialty metallic papers that were created with the wax paste. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a fabulous day.